Thank you. That is all in for this evening. That was fun. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
I love Joy Reid talking about the magic sword of pain.
Yes, that's right.
That was one for the ages.
That's in Article 2 of the Constitution, I believe.
It's actually Deuteronomy, Chris. Come on. Thanks, you guys. And thanks to you, Dome, for staying with us for the next hour. All right, this is the Gallup Poll over time, over the last 20 years, showing the favorability rating for the two main political parties in our country. Red for Republican, blue for Democrat. Over time, big picture, as you can see, the Democratic Party is sort of broadly more popular, more well-liked in the country than the Republican Party is, the second term of the George W. Bush presidency in particular. Way earlier than that, though, Republicans do have this one big problem area, one big plunge. It's more than a dip, right? They kind of fell off a cliff right there. What exactly was going on right there that made the country hate the Republican Party so much more dramatically than they had ever hated them before? That was the vote to impeach President Bill Clinton for stooping an intern. Republicans, of course, saw that as a great political triumph. They had finally impeached a Democratic president, but the country hated them for it. Over the last 20 years, the country has never hated Republicans more than they hated them at that moment. Until now. The new Gallup polling on the American public's view of the Republican Party is now the worst it has ever been in modern times. It has even gone lower than it was during the Clinton impeachment era. And that apparently is the reward that you get if you can stretch your government shutdown to be longer than Hanukkah. It is more than 8 crazy nights now. We are into day 9. And day 9, I guess, is when the wheels start to fall off. Things really did just seem like they started to break apart today. And I think it started with the front page of this morning's newspapers. The fact that Republican members of Congress no longer believe blowing through the debt ceiling might be a big deal. They no longer believe that defaulting on the national debt would have catastrophic consequences. The denialism that the debt ceiling matters at all, that has been a story that's been percolating a while now in this crisis, right? It's been covered extensively in places like the National Journal, places like Talking Points Memo online. It's been on MSNBC. You've seen it on this show. It is a known story that has been increasingly reported out over the course of the crisis. But today, for whatever reason, today was the day that this story about Republican denial of the debt ceiling being a big deal, today was the day it finally landed on the front pages in places like the New York Times and Politico.com. It also got very prominent placement in the Wall Street Journal. And it's kind of hard to believe that Wall Street actually has to read it in the Wall Street Journal before they believe it's true. But in fact, the mainstream influential financial and political press finally waking up to the fact that Republicans are in la-la land about whether the debt ceiling is a big deal, that finally seems to have woken some people up today. That today, finally, with it on the front pages, seems to have made this issue go off like a particularly loud and jarring alarm clock. Because today was the day that Wall Street finally started to freak out about what is happening in Washington. I mean, if you have been watching closely recently, you would have seen that things like the VIX, what they call the fear index, that has been going up over the last few weeks since the shutdown crisis has been upon us. Over at Ezra Klein's Wonk blog, they've been watching the price of short-term bonds go up. See how it spikes there on the right side of the graph? And that's a bad sign, but it's a very specific, wonky, and relatively small sign. Today was the day that the signs got bigger. Today was the signs that we started to get bigger and much less subtle signs that the ground is shaking beneath Wall Street. The biggest shudder today was when the investment firm Fidelity dumped U.S. Treasury bonds. Fidelity is the biggest manager of money market mutual funds in the whole country. And today they announced that they have sold off all U.S. government bonds that might come due around the time that we are due to be hitting the debt ceiling. They told the Associated Press somewhat shakily that they expect the debt ceiling issue will be resolved, but just in case, they are, quote, taking steps to protect their investors. Eek. And those are just the mutual fund people. I mean, if China does that, if Japan does that, with all the T-bonds they own, we'll all be living in yurts, milking goats by next week. So Wall Street today started their sell-off of U.S. government bonds. Wall Street today decided to finally essentially rattle the cage about what's been going on in Washington. And inside the cage, inside Washington, they did get rattled. the Republican politics around the shutdown and the debt ceiling and what this is all about and where they ought to hold the line and what they're supposed to be fighting for just collapsed today. The narrative just collapsed. Two of the most aggressive conservative groups who've been pushing for the shutdown all along, who've been hounding any Republicans who wouldn't go along with the shutdown, today, two of those groups essentially bowed out. The CEO of Heritage Action, which is the political activist part of the Jim DeMint group, the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Action is the group that ran targeted ads against 100 different Republican members of Congress. Republicans, hounding them for not signing on to that letter to John Boehner that demanded the shutdown last month. They ran ads against 100 different Republicans demanding that they take a hard line on the shutdown. Well, Heritage Action today said we think that Republicans should pass a clean debt ceiling. Also today, FreedomWorks, which has been banging the drum for a shutdown for months now. Today, FreedomWorks CEO told the Huffington Post that, we also think they ought to pass a debt ceiling. At least get that part of it taken care of. You know, that same person, that same CEO from FreedomWorks 1 week ago, said, we will go past the deadline for the debt ceiling. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That was 1 week ago. But now, a week later, with Wall Street starting to get a little freaked out and political people starting to hear about it, 1 week later, he has completely changed his tune. Now he says, we need to pass the debt ceiling. Both the FreedomWorks flip-flop guy and the Heritage Action Group, they're sort of trying to save face by saying the only reason they don't want to blow through the debt ceiling now is because they don't want it to be a distraction from the focus on Obamacare. But at the same time that they made that argument today, Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor both published op-eds today saying that the Republicans need to keep up the fight for a whole bunch of stuff that does not center around Obamacare. Paul Ryan did not even mention Obamacare at all in the op-ed that he wrote in the Wall Street Journal today about what it is that the Republicans need to keep fighting about. So if you're looking for cues from Washington about what exactly is going on and why we're still shut down and what it's all about, you can take your pick today. They're either fighting only about Obamacare and forget the debt ceiling, or they are definitely fighting over the debt ceiling and forget about Obamacare. Okay. Whatever the strategy was before, it sort of evaporated today. Between the conservative groups and the members of Congress who supposedly are doing their bidding, or vice versa, absolutely no coherence as of today. And that was all before the Koch brothers freaked out today. The Koch brothers and their conservative funding bank, Freedom Partners, they spent nearly $250 million over the last year funding all of the groups that have been driving the shutdown fight. That creepy papier-mâché head, Uncle Sam wants to get in your pants ads, that ads telling college students to not get health insurance, funded by the Koch brothers, right? Heritage Action, which has been advocating the shutdown and whipping the vote on the shutdown and running ads against Republicans who are insufficiently hard line on the shutdown. Heritage Action, funded by the Koch brothers. The Tea Party Patriots, which put out the Defund the Government to Shut Down Obamacare toolkit, funded by the Koch brothers. They spent $236 million over the past year to fund basically every significant component of the shutdown effort. Shut down the government to stop Obamacare, brought to you by the Koch brothers. Well, today, the Koch brothers wrote a letter to Congress explaining that really they have no position on this whole issue. No position on the shutdown. Sure, they're against Obamacare, but they're not actually working on doing anything about it. They're just funding all of the groups that have been demanding that the government shut down as a way of trying to take Obamacare apart. Their letter says, quote, Koch has not taken a position on the legislative tactic of tying the continuing resolution to defunding Obamacare. And technically, I'm sure that is true, but they have also funded the entire network of organizations that have demanded that outcome and forced it on the country. Who us? Don't blame us. So the wheels are really coming off here. Republicans do not agree anymore on what they are trying to get or on how they are trying to get it. And they are clearly moving into that phase of the collapse where people try to make sure that they are not going to get blamed for what has just happened. It is starting to feel like this is ending. It's an important practical question now, though, about how fast it ends. Because the practical impact of the shutdown is not just becoming politically untenable, it is becoming untenable. The way that most government agencies dealt with the prospect of a shutdown was by moving money around as best they could, by sliding money away from things that could wait to things that had to be done right now, essentially hoping that the shutdown would be short, and by moving around, they could maybe ride it out. That strategy all over the government, in basically all government agencies, is now resulting in new stuff closing down every day because the money's drying up. They could make it work for a couple of days, but now this is long enough that it's not working anymore. So we had, for a few days, enough people on staff at the Veterans Administration to process veterans' claims for benefits. Now we don't. 7,000 people furloughed there yesterday. We had enough people on staff to keep the Nuclear Regulatory Commission going. You know, the people who make sure no Fukushima here. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission today announced that they had been using carryover funds that they had been able to use to keep the Regulatory Commission open for these last few days, but now those funds have been depleted. The notice from the commissioner today says Wednesday, today, is the last full day that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will be operating normally until we receive an appropriation. There was a fatal train accident on the red line of the D.C. metro system last week. Because of the shutdown, the National Transportation Safety Board has stopped investigating what caused that accident. The West Texas chemical plant apocalypse that blew up 150 buildings and killed 15 people, that is being investigated by the U.S. Chemical Safety Board, which has a staff of 41 people. 37 of the 41, as of now, are on furlough. The investigation into that explosion has now been put on hold. Do you have a plant like that in your town? The cries of outrage coast to coast yesterday over the families of servicemen and servicewomen killed in Afghanistan not being funded to fly to Dover to greet the caskets with the remains of their loved ones coming home from the war they are fighting in our name. Congress and the White House and the Office of Management and Budget and the Pentagon and even private organizations all scrambling today to try to make that better, to try to piece things together for those families, to try to at least put that back together again. But every day now, this piece-by-piece rescue effort, this respond to the latest outrage, fix this thing here and this thing here, piecemeal response, is just starting not to work. With each passing day, less of this is going to work. With every passing day, every passing hour, something else has to shut down. That will be an outrage or a huge danger or a grave political upset to somebody somewhere who will then clamor to try to get it fixed. But there are more of these things every day because the money runs out every day. And it gets worse every day. And ultimately, all the king's horses and all the king's men are not going to be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. This is broken. And until it is made whole again, this catch-as-catch-can happenstance way that they've been trying to alleviate the worst of it is becoming impossible. And it will be more impossible tomorrow than it was today, and it'll be even more impossible the day after that. And so the pressure of the shutdown itself, the political pressure of Republicans not knowing why they're doing this and how long they're going to keep doing it, the rattling of the financial markets today as people realize they might actually blow through the debt ceiling today. That seems to have broken this thing open on the right. The continuing pressure of the shutdown itself is breaking this thing open for everyone. But if this is in fact breaking apart, what happens next? Joining us now is Ryan Grimm. He's Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post. Ryan, it's great to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What is the Capitol Hill manifestation of the kinds of shifts we're seeing around the arguments about why they're doing this, about what their strategy is? How is this manifesting among House Republicans?
Well, you're totally right that this whole thing has broken apart, but in a way that's been a gift to House Republicans because, you know, as I said earlier this week, they really didn't have a strategy. They were just kind of waiting for something to happen. And so the Tea Party taking the debt ceiling sort of off the table is a gift to them in the sense that it at least allows them to form a semblance of a strategy. You know, if you think about what is the Republican coalition, if you can even call it that at this point, if you have Wall Street and you have the Tea Party, Heritage and Freedom works together, that's pretty much it. And with both of them telling House Republicans, don't blow up the debt ceiling, that means they're not going to blow up the debt ceiling. So they're now talking about a 30-day or a 6-week completely clean extension. And once they extend it once, it's extremely unlikely that they'll play brinksmanship with it again right between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which is where that would take us. But that leaves you with the government shutdown. And they genuinely think that they can win on the CR. You know, they look at the government and, you know, they're not noticing what you notice, that more things start shutting down every day. They've just seen this stat out there saying, well, 86% of the government is still running, so this is okay. We can weather this in our district in, you know, suburban Dallas or wherever they might represent.
Ryan, what do you expect in terms of the timing on sorting out the debt limit issue. Obviously, any signals to the markets, both worldwide and domestically, that this is going to get fixed are going to have an immediate calming effect. But what do you sense in terms of the procedural timeline it's going to take in order to get that squared away?
According to Harry Reid's office, they have heard nothing from Republicans in terms of moving forward on the debt ceiling. So that part is not hopeful, but they have an absolutely awful relationship right now, the Boehner and Reid staff and Boehner and Reid personally. So that's not necessarily surprising. Even though that has happened, I think that it will move pretty quickly, and they don't even need to talk about it, because if Boehner actually puts a clean debt ceiling bill on the floor and it passes with some Democratic votes, the Senate will have to take it up. I mean, there would be no excuse for them not to, and the president will obviously sign it. And I do see that happening relatively quickly, especially because of the volatility that you alluded to.
Ryan Grimm, Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post. Ryan, thanks for helping us track this. I appreciate you being here, man. Thanks.
My pleasure.
All right. I'm seeing into the future. It is 6 months from now. And on every television screen and every internet machine, I see Democratic campaign ads wailing on Republican candidates who voted to shut down the government. Actually, you don't have to see into the future. It's already happening right now. They're doing a dry run right now for the 2014 election. Are they doing a good job? That's coming up. Stay with us.